Hey YouTube, what is up? This is a deck profile of my Quantum Monarchs. This is different than my last Quantum Monarch build. This is built more towards consistency, and this is the deck that I did play when I went to regionals. I was 5-2 at one point until I played a YCS champ, but yeah. So here's the deck profile for you guys. Basically, 3 Erebus because this is your first turn play, hopefully, and you can make your opponent start out with 4 cards in hand. That's pretty broken, and this allows you to start up your Monarch engine by ditching Pantheism and Prime, and then you can just keep on going from there. Your opponent's turn plays is 3 Ether. You can do Ether as many times as you want on your opponent's turn as long as you have the graveyard materials to banish, which is really broken. You can basically summon 3 Ether on your opponent's turn and then have all the special summon monsters alongside it. It also helps really well to set up board beforehand on your opponent's second main phase before they end their turn, and they didn't do anything that turn. Bring out your Ether. It just searches your deck for your other Monarchs and helps you thin your deck out so that you don't draw into the Monarch and you get an extra card to hand. It's a really good play, and the fact that you could do 3 of it in one of your opponent's turns is absolutely broken. And it's also an out to Stormforth, because if you control one tribute summon monster and your opponent activates Stormforth, chain to the Stormforth, Ether's effect goes off, brings out Karaz, pop both your monsters, and once you pop both your monsters, your opponent doesn't have a tribute on your side of the field anymore. If they don't have a tribute on their side of the field, they screwed themselves over, and then you get to draw 2 cards as well. So there's some pretty broken plays with it. I also play 1 Majesty's Fiend. Now the reason I only do 1 is because I run Return of the Monarchs, and it is searchable in this deck, and I can deck thin a lot with the build I play. So seeing 2 of these is good, but because of how low its attack is, it can be easily swung over, and instead of running the second Majesties in main deck, I ran 1 Thestalos. The reason I did 1 Thestalos is because this is another card that your opponent doesn't want to see you pull out first turn on them, especially like Erebus. It basically allows you to pluck a card from your opponent's hand, but this time you get to look at their hand. So you can pull a monster, and if you pull a monster, whatever that monster's level is, times 200 is the amount of life points they lose, or you can pull out like a Raigeki or a Dark Hole out of their hand. And I've used this a couple times to make people really salty. Pulling Star Destroyer, pulled that out of someone's hand when I sacrificed a red layer to bring this out, and I burned them for 2600 on their first turn, and they started with 2600 life points less than me and 4 cards in hand. They were a little salty. And the last Monarch I play, which I mentioned before, is Karaz. Now the reason I do Karaz is just because I only run 1. I don't want to run 2. I never want to draw this card, and usually what I'll try and do is deck thin it as soon as I can. So if my opponent goes in their second main phase, I'm just going to Ether Karaz, pop anything I don't need on my field, maybe like a set Tenacities or something I couldn't use, just to get the draws out. I really don't like Karaz. I only like him as a draw engine, and he's a good side out. So that's basically the only reason I run him, is just to draw a shit ton, really. That's the only reason, and I don't want to draw more than 1 of Karaz. I don't want to see 2 Karaz. So when I draw him, it's a disappointment, but I'd rather run only 1 of him and basically never see him than run 2, and then when I draw one, I have one in the deck, but then I have a dead card in hand. That's it for my big Monarchs and my larger cards. Let me just scoop that up. Now for the smaller Squires that I run. I've seen people running Mithra, but I don't like running Mithra. I like to run 3 Edea. The reason I run 3 Edea is because when this card goes to the graveyard, I get all my banished spell and traps basically back again and again and again. And I can send this to the graveyard, I think, 6 times. So I can get 6 banished spell or traps back, and that's really good in my mind. I run 2 Edeos, just because I don't want to see it in hand. I'd rather see Edea, so I'd like a greater chance of seeing Edea. Now, the reason I'm, only running 2 of him is because I'm not playing full regular Monarchs. If you're playing the pure Monarch build, you're going to want 3 Edeos. But just for my needs, I don't need 3 of him. Now, the reason I like these cards, but I'm running the Quantum build, is because Effect Veiler shuts this engine down completely. So I don't like it when my opponent draws Effect Veiler first turn. I normal summon this, and then they go Effect Veiler, and then I'm screwed. I'd rather bring out my monster on the first turn, my large monster, by using the field spell to sacrifice 1 monster that I special summon. And the monster that I would special summon is Super Quantum Red Layer. I run 3 Quantum Red Layer just because of how broken his engine is, pretty much. The reason I run these as opposed to the pure Monarch build is this can't get Effect Veilered. This does not reveal in hand when you're special summoning it. It's like Cyber Dragon, you just summon it to the field, you don't have to reveal it in hand first. So it's really good. When you have one of these in graveyard and you special or normal summon another one, you get to add the one in graveyard to hand. So if you want a broken play and you have the field spell on the field and you want to lock your opponent out of their extra deck, but all you've done so far is have 1 red layer in grave and 1 red layer in hand. You can special summon the red layer from hand because you don't control a monster. Add the red layer from graveyard to your hand, and then what you can do is sacrifice your red layer that's on the field to summon this red layer, and then I'm not sure on this if that red layer gets added to hand again because I think it's a once per turn effect. But then you have a red layer on field that can be 2800 in combination with the field spell, and you lock your opponent out of their extra deck. So it's not bad at all. And then the last 2 cards I run in my monsters is 2 Effect Veiler. I know the Platinum Rare looks like garbage. I was going to pick up Ultis, but I decided to pick up some other cards instead. Effect Veiler is really, really good. I love it. And it's a good side out, especially if you're going up against something that does not get Effect Veilered. It's not a great card against Cosmos and stuff like that, but when I was playing at the tournament, if I drew Effect Veiler, it never really was dead. It's also a good card to ditch if it is dead with 1-for-1 and stuff like that. So it's not too bad to use. I'd rather main deck this than main deck Maxi, just because if I go up against a Monarch player and I don't have Effect Veiler and I have a Maxi, I'm basically never going to get a draw. So I'd rather run the Effect Veiler because it stops more decks, and then if I need to, side into Maxis. Now for my traps, I run 2 Prime Monarch. That's about it. The reason I only run 2 of these is because I like to have both in graveyard. I don't like the having one on the field in the back row. I don't like that, but if I need to, I can do it. I could force it to be banished. I could banish Prime Monarch with Prime Monarch and then have Edia recycle this back to my hand if I really need to start recycling my graveyard back into my deck to keep my Monarch plays going. But if I don't need to do that, I don't want to. It's way better in my mind to have 2 tribute summons that I don't have to actually normal summon. I could special summon 1 on my opponent's end phase, 1 on my main phase, and then I have 2 cards on the field that I could sacrifice even if I don't have the field spell. I could bring out any Monarch guaranteed at that point. So that's why I like to run 2 of them. I would run 3, but I feel like it's too cloggy and you see it in your hand too often. I only see this in my hand occasionally, and if I do see it in hand, it's pretty much a brick hand already. So I don't want to see this in my hand unless I have a Pantheism, and getting those 2 cards together is kind of rare. And now for my spells, I do run triple Upstart Goblin. Now, the reason I do triple Upstart Goblin as opposed to the E-Teleport Quantum build is because it's a lot more consistent with Upstart Goblin. You're basically running a 37 card deck. You never want to draw into a blue layer, and with the red layer build with Super Quantums, if you're using E-Tele, you really don't want to draw into red layer either. You want to deck thin using the E-Tele blue layer. So when I use this, I can't get fucked over pretty much. I can't get Solemn Strength. I can't get Solemn Warninged. So it's a lot better in my mind because I'd rather just special summon the red layer from hand. If it gets destroyed, it gets destroyed. But then I'm basically screwing myself over if I use E-Tele, because if E-Tele gets destroyed, then I have a greater chance of drawing into blue layer because there's only 2 more E-Teles in my deck or something like that. I never want blue layer to hand, and when I get blue layer to hand early on or turn 1, it's kind of a death sentence. So I'd rather just get the 3 red layer, which is why I run the 3 upstarts. I also play 3 Pantheism because you have to. I really hope that this card doesn't get hit, but I can fully understand why if it does. It is completely broken. It is too powerful and it adds way too many cards to hand, and it can be looped if you banish it off its own effect and then send ED to graveyard. You get it to hand again, and then basically you could just keep on going. You can go probably like +4 or +5 with this card fairly easily. I'd say I've seen people actually go all 3 in 1 turn, and they've gone basically +6 and just deck thinned a whole shit ton. So it's a kind of broken card. I'll admit it completely, and I hope it doesn't get hit because it's really integral to how my deck runs, but I could definitely see why it would be. Next up, I run 3 Field Spell. Now, most often people run 2 of these. I run 3 of them just because I like having the extra fodder for my Monarchs, and I like the fact that in regionals, having 3 of these absolutely saved me a whole bunch of times. Just because of how many people run extra deck, I'd rather draw into this or be able to force this with a banished Pantheism. If you banish Pantheism, you reveal 3 spell or traps. If I can reveal 3 field spell and I don't have to show them Tenacities, I don't want to do that. Because if I show them Tenacities and I don't have a Monarch in hand, I'm bluffing them, and if they call my bluff, I don't get the field spell. So I run 3 of them just so I could show it with Pantheism. That's why I like to do it, and I have locked a lot of people out of their extra deck with this, and then having a Vanities or Majesty's Fiend on board and March of the Monarchs. Next up, the out to pretty much every card you can't get over is a Stormforth. 3 of them is broken. This card is probably going to get hit, especially because it's getting a gold rare reprint, and when things get gold rare reprints, they get hit shortly after, just like Lavalval Chain. So I love this card. It's a pretty much out to anything. Your opponent has a Dark Destroyer on board, and you don't know how to get over it. You don't have a field spell to swing over it. Stormforth. your opponent has anything, Stormforth. The only thing this can't get over is basically a Fog King. And that's pretty much it. You know, there's some weird, wacky rulings with this in Kaiser Coliseum, so I gotta see how those rule. But for now, Kaiser Coliseum is the only card that pretty much stops this. And yeah, it's really broken. So if you have a Monarch deck and you're not running 3 of these, you're a dum-dum. You gotta run 3 just because it's an out to every play your opponent basically has. Next up, I run 3 Tenacity because if I have a Monarch in hand and I have a Pantheism in the graveyard, I'm going to want to fuel my graveyard so I have targets for Prime Monarch. So if I have no targets in my graveyard for Prime Monarch and I just banished a Pantheism to add a card to hand, I can do Pantheism, show 3 Tenacity, basically show my Monarch in hand, send the Tenacity to the graveyard. Now I have a target for Prime Monarch to banish so that I can have a defensive wall if need be, and I get the card I want to hand still. I also play 1 Foolish and 1 for 1. The reason I play Foolish Burial is to send Idiot to the graveyard to get a banished spell or trap back, or to send Erebus to the graveyard, or if I have Erebus in graveyard already, send any other card I want to the graveyard to get it to hand pretty much. If I have Erebus in graveyard and a Monarch spell or trap in hand, and I want to bring out, say, a Majesty's Fiend, Foolish Burial, send Majesty's Fiend to the graveyard, send the card from my hand to the graveyard as per Erebus' effect to add Majesty's Fiend to hand. So it allows for you to just search out any card you want pretty much as a Monarch, as long as you have Erebus in grave, or you can put the Erebus in grave to recycle anything in your graveyard, and Idiot just to get your banished spell and traps back. 1 for 1 leads to some broken plays. 1 for 1 ditching Idia or ditching Erebus is your ideal play. 1 for 1 you ditch Idia, you get the banished spell or trap back, and then you special summon Idia from your deck, and then you special summon EDOs from your deck, and then you have a tribute summon that turn and a normal summon, so that means you can bring out 2 big Monarchs in 1 turn, which is really, really broken. You can bring out 2 Ether and then have 4 large Monarchs on board to push for damage, which is really, really good. Then I play 1 March of the Monarchs and 1 Return of the Monarchs. I only do 1 of each. I don't like running 2 of these and none of this, and 2 of these and none of this. March has led me to so many game wins just because it stops Raigekis, it stops Dark Holes, it allows me to pretty much screw my opponent over utterly and completely. This tied with a Majesty's Fiend or a Vanity's Fiend in the field spell is broken. This tied with a Fog King in the mirror match is broken because my opponent can't Dark Hole it, my opponent can't Stormforth anyway because of Fog King, so they have no out to it unless they draw an MST or a Twin Twister and a Dark Hole, so it really leads to some broken shit. And this I really love just because of how I can do Ether's plays with it. If I have an Ether in hand on my opponent's turn, tribute summon the Ether using its own effect, bring out Ether, Ether special summons whatever Monarch I want, probably an Erebus. Return of the Monarchs adds Ether to hand, and then I can do Ether's effect again. And then I bring out Ether and Erebus, and then I can do Ether's effect again. And I can bring out 3 Ether on my opponent's turn, and basically 2 special summon monsters if I really, really wanted to. Or I think it'd rather be because I have to tribute the tribute summon monster. It'd probably be 2 Ether and 3 special summoned Monarchs, but having a 5 Monarch board is pretty broken, and then 3 of them go back to your hand anyway. So Return of the Monarch leads to some broken plays because it's not once per turn. You could also add Majesty's Fiend off of it because Majesty's Fiend is searchable. And I've seen some builds with Dark Arm Dragon that is also searchable with this. And then because you can manipulate your graveyard, Dark Arm Dragon's not a bad card either. Now, onto my extra deck. That's a joke. At regionals, every single time I sat down, somebody goes, "Do you have an extra deck?" And I go, "God damn it, no, I don't." And then they get really happy because they knew exactly what deck I played, and I'm at a huge disadvantage because I didn't know what deck they were playing. It seems kind of unfair that that can happen, but I understand why. Anyway, I run 1 Raigeki and 1 Dark Hole. This is for a Cosmo matchup. This is for if my opponent has Fog King. This is for Pendulums if my opponent knows how to set up a big board really easily. Because I can Raigeki and Dark Hole on my turn, wipe their board, then have a Monarch and field spell set, and they can't bring the monsters back from the extra deck. So at least it's some pretty broken stuff. I run 2 Max C. The reason I do 2 Max C instead of 3 is because I just take Effect Veiler out if I don't need Effect Veiler, put Max C in, and I let my opponent take the Max C challenge pretty much. Max C speaks for itself. I run 1 Idios because in the tournament, what I did occasionally, if I didn't have enough room to side in what I wanted, I would side out the 3 red layer and then side out 3 upstarts and then put in 1 Idios and then whatever sidecars I needed. I would basically smoke screen into pure Monarchs because I knew my opponent wouldn't side in Effect Veiler once they saw that I had the Quantum red layers. So I basically shut them down a little bit and then smoke screen into a different deck that they didn't expect me to be kind of playing. I also play the second Majesty's Fiend. This just comes in handy, especially if I know what my opponent's playing. If my opponent's playing Mermails or something like that, I can bring out a Majesty's Fiend. I usually side out Thestalos to put in the second Majesty's Fiend, just to lock my opponent down. And Return of the Monarchs really helps bring it out as well. I then run 2 Vanity's Fiend for anything that basically special summons from extra deck a bunch. So I do like to run Majesty's and Vanity's Fiends, but I do have to side out other cards for that. If you side out monsters, you want to side back in monsters, otherwise you get really weird ratios and you draw a bunch of useless spells. I then play 2 Fog King for the mirror match. Fog King's really good. I actually don't draw it all that often, and when I have it in hand, it's a last-ditch effort kind of thing. It's a last resort. I usually have my opponents locked when I play the Monarch mirror match, and then Fog King is just my backup, my plan B if I don't have any plans. I then play all the back row hate I can, which is 2 Royal Decree. 2 Royal Decree stops a bunch of shit, and 3 Twin Twister. Basically, Royal Decree and Twin Twister are to get rid of Masker Restricts or Iron Walls, which basically screw me over. And I actually played a Monarch FTK Magical Explosion deck, and game 2, I sided in 3 Twin Twister, 2 Royal Decree, saw Twin Twister and Royal Decree. He predicted the Twin Twister and prohibitioned it, so I couldn't use it, but I flipped the Royal Decree and actually won that. Really, really good to have both, because your opponent doesn't always expect the Royal Decree. Sometimes they expect the Twin Twister. If a Monarch player sets a trap, they're usually thinking it's a Prime Monarch, so they're probably not going to hit it because then they think they're going to give you another target to special summon from your graveyard. Anyway, that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked it, you can follow me on Twitter @Schwabs, or you can like my Facebook page, facebook.com/TheVinnyDShow. If you really liked the video, you can click subscribe. It's free, it's fun, and I'll see you guys in the next one.